Hi everyone, this is Phil Travis, and this announcement is for week 8 in the 60s. This week we are going to continue our examination of the Vietnam War. I have another documentary film that I want you to watch this week. I also have a lecture from myself that I'd like you to listen to this week that I think will really help you in understanding the subject of the Vietnam War. And in subsequent classes, as we move forward, we're going to talk about the counterculture movement, the anti-war movement. We're going to talk about how Vietnam sort of undermines the Democratic Party in the United States and gives rise to the presidency of Richard Nixon following the Tet Offensive in 1968. So in a lot of ways, particularly in the latter half of the 1960s, the Vietnam War really became the centerpiece of a lot of issues in the United States, political issues, issues of protest, and other activities within the United States. In a lot of senses, whether it was music and culture, or political elections, or protests, the Vietnam War in the late 1960s really came to be positioned at the center of the discourse in the United States. So we're going to be examining Vietnam further this week. The reading assigned for this week, what I want you to read is I want you to read Chapter 3 from our book, The 60s, the Purple Book. And our discussion forum this week is going to directly ask you a question about that. In terms of our textbook, The Age of Great Dreams, if you haven't read Chapter 6 yet, which was assigned last week, do read that. But I'm going to ask you to really focus on reading Chapter 3 from the Purple 60s book, and then watch this documentary that I'm posting. I'm going to have a little quiz associated with the documentary. It's just a participation response quiz. It should be easy. I just want to make sure you are watching the documentary. And then I will also have a lecture of myself this week. So we'll have that easy participation quiz and the discussion forum this week, my lecture, a documentary film, and then a brief chapter-long reading from the Purple Book, The 60s. So we continue our discussion of Vietnam this week. I have, of course, finished grading everybody's project proposals, and those look pretty good. Some of you are writing papers, some of you are doing projects like podcasts, some of you are doing PowerPoints. Remember, if you are doing a PowerPoint, I want you to record the PowerPoint. Make sure it's a narrated PowerPoint. I don't want you to simply put together some slides and say, here you go. I'd like to see you do a narrated PowerPoint. You know, probably around 10 minutes long, not too long, not too short. Remember, if you do a PowerPoint, you should have a slide at the end that references your material, just like in a paper. I expect you to cite the paper. For the paper, I want you to use just parenthetical citations, cite in text. At the end of the paragraph or sentence, just have the author's last name and a page number, or the title and a page number if you don't have the author, in parentheses before the period. And then, of course, at the end, list your sources used in the paper. Remember, have author, title, publisher information when you're listing your sources. And with respect to the PowerPoints, make sure you follow that same protocol when it comes to listing your sources on the final slide in the PowerPoint. Remember, a URL address is not a citation. That's not a source reference. You need to have an author, a title, publisher information. Sometimes there is no author, in which case, title, publisher information. So hopefully that's pretty clear. If anything is not clear, please do let me know. I did comment rather extensively on everybody's proposals. So as you look at those, if you have questions, make sure you reach out to me and ask me whatever questions you may have. You're certainly welcome to come by my office hours, particularly on Monday and Wednesday between 11:30 and 1 on the Bradenton campus in Building 9, 124 in the Social Behavioral Sciences Department. I'm happy to speak with you in whichever way is easiest for you to answer any questions you might have. Our tests were, of course, due very recently. I will get on those and get those graded soon as well. All right, now for the fact this week. Here's the fact. This is very interesting. I bet you that nobody knows this fact. So we're talking about the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was an incredibly destructive and long conflict. For the United States, The U.S. involvement in terms of military men fighting on the ground in Vietnam begins in the 60s, of course. The first advisors were sent under President Eisenhower in the late 50s. In the Kennedy administration in the early 60s, of course, the advisors program, went up beyond 10,000 advisors to 16,000 advisors. Of course, tragically, John F. Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. Following that, Lyndon Johnson became president, and of course, with the assassination of the president of Vietnam, Ngo Dinh Diem, there was like a power vacuum in Vietnam, in South Vietnam, and it put the United States in a position where the United States would either become more involved in Vietnam, or it would have to start to extricate itself from Vietnam. And of course, because of issues surrounding the Cold War and the desire to globally contain communism to prevent the so-called domino theory from occurring, the United States under Lyndon Johnson ultimately made the choice to deepen the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. And of course, in 1965, Lyndon Johnson begins the bombing campaign, Operation Rolling Thunder, and in March of 1965, the first U.S. combat troops are sent to Vietnam. So, the U.S. war in Vietnam, in terms of a military involvement in Vietnam, is really in the 60s. For the Vietnamese people, the Vietnam War was really a time period from the end of World War II to 1975. It was really a 30-year event that, is sometimes called the 10,000-day war. So a much longer event for the Vietnamese people, who fought first the French Indochina War, which ended in the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, before fighting the U.S. South Vietnamese ally and, of course, the United States in Vietnam. Here is the factoid. Remember, email me this factoid no later than Wednesday by midnight. Get your bonus point added to a test score at the end of the term by doing this. And as these add up, it'll boost your grade quite a bit, actually, at the end of the term. So hopefully everybody's participating in this and doing this. Here's the factoid. To this day, there is still a problem in Vietnam with unexploded ordnance. So bombs that were dropped that didn't blow up, or landmines that were put in the ground during the war years. The most problematic areas are areas around the old DMZ, the border between North and South Vietnam, in places like the Quang Tri province, for example. Areas that were close to where the base Khe Sanh was located, which we'll talk about later in the class, the siege of Khe Sanh, or the Battle of Khe Sanh. There's a real problem in Vietnam today, still, with unexploded ordnance. And actually, the United States government sends aid to Vietnam each year to help them deal with the issue of unexploded ordnance, mines and unexploded bombs. Here's the factoid. Since 1975, Vietnam estimates that upwards of 100,000 people, civilians, have been killed from unexploded ordnance left over from the Vietnam War. So the factoid, unexploded ordnance from the Vietnam War remains a real problem today. The United States government gives money to Vietnam to help them clean up the unexploded ordnance that remains in the country. In fact, American servicemen, many who served in the Vietnam War, in some cases have volunteered to go to Vietnam and help with the program of clearing out all the unexploded ordnance. It is such a problem that it is estimated by the Vietnamese government that since 1975, maybe upwards of 100,000 civilians have been killed by unexploded ordnance left over from the Vietnam War. All right, everyone, email me that factoid. Just summarize it. No later than Wednesday by midnight. Get your bonus point. Let's have a great week. Let me know if you have any questions. I hope you enjoy my lecture this week as well as the film.